and Bill and Carol Ann Young. Our next dialogue is March 25th with Jeremy Johnson, President and CEO of the Assembly for the Arts. The invitation will be delivered to South Rankin Circle residents next week. For the April dialogue, we have a substitute speaker scheduled. Jill Dietrich Mellon of the VA has been promoted and relocated. But we have Bob Fastrom, who is the interim deputy director and chief operating officer for the VA Northeast Ohio Healthcare System, and he will present. Following today's presentation, we will break and move to Q&A. John O'Brien and Darlene Cash will do that job. And be sure that you wait till the mic comes and indicate your name and then ask your question. And now it's my dearest pleasure to bring John O'Brien to the podium. He will introduce our speaker this evening. You want to move that?
I'll work around it.
Oh, that's right, okay.
I'm not going to use the little stool here, if that's okay. Good evening and welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Christina Felix. Christy received her undergraduate degree in mathematics and computer science, and she received her master's degree in theoretical mathematics. A year ago, in February 2025, I called Christy's boss, Jay Alberts, to ask him whom he would recommend from the Cleveland Clinic to speak about artificial intelligence. We had a couple of candidates from the clinic. Neither one was Christy, by the way. And Jay immediately responded, Christy Felix would be your best speaker. Christy manages the artificial intelligence process in his neurological research lab at the clinic. Jay added that Christy has the unique ability to explain very complicated matters like artificial intelligence to both scientists and non-scientists. A month later, in March of 2025, Christy accepted our invitation to speak about artificial intelligence in healthcare to our Monday men's luncheon group. And she received rave reviews from the group. So much so that the Dialogues Committee added her to our list of candidates for this season. And here she is with us this evening. So please join me in welcoming Christy Felix to share with us how artificial intelligence can benefit the treatment of various medical conditions. Christy?
Hello, thank you to John and Pauline for all the amazing help that I've had so far in being able to join you here today. I really appreciate the invitation to come and talk to you about the research that we have been doing in our lab and some of the general applications of artificial intelligence that I hope we'll have some time to discuss today. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about artificial intelligence in general, and then share some specific research that we've been doing. And I hope to have a really great question and answer session. So as we go through this, I hope you're thinking of questions. I hope you come prepared with questions. I'd love to have that conversation so that we can kind of answer the things that are interesting to you as well. So the first thing I wanted to do was kind of set the stage and why we're talking about artificial intelligence now. So this is something that has been around for a while, but there's been a lot of changes recently. It's certainly made a lot of headlines in the news. You've heard a lot more about it. You're probably experimenting when you're on the internet with using some of the artificial intelligence models that are out there now, like ChatGPT. When I was invited here for the men's luncheon, I found that folks were using it a lot, had some interesting questions. So I hope we can continue to kind of build on that. What has happened that has led to this new era in artificial intelligence is that we've collected a lot of digital records that we never had before. And so the point that I want to make here is how much of this is data-driven technology. So we've had mathematical models, we've had predictive models for a long time. And what we really have now is a tremendously large amount of data and the computing power to process that data. So those two things together, we are collecting digital data and we have the ability to process it now, have led to the data-driven algorithms that we call artificial intelligence. And as we continue to iterate, we collect more data, we have new systems, we have more collection, our computing power increases, and the algorithms get better as well. So this is a cycle that's going to keep improving. We're going to keep seeing these major advances every time we iterate through this and come to a new turning point in artificial intelligence. So that's the background. I want to talk now about some of the specific research that we've been doing for neurological diseases in the J. Alberts lab. So in particular, we have been trying to work with data that already exists, data that is in the electronic health record, to understand what is happening prior to the onset of neurological diseases. So we had just an idea prior to the onset of neurological disease. So this is where we get into that big data collection. We have over 50,000 patients that we have gone in and collected that data. And these are folks, half of them are folks who have converted to neurological disease, one of Alzheimer's, ALS, MS, or Parkinson's disease. And then we have folks that looked a lot like them initially. The controls in the group were maybe the same age, had some other of the same conditions, and they did not end up converting to disease. So we could go back and say, what looked different, what changed, how can we see a little bit more about what's happening before the clinical symptoms are present. So that's the data collection, that's a huge part. None of this AI exists without the data that it learns from. And then we are able to make those predictions. Now that we have fed in hundreds of variables from longitudinal historical data from all the lives that have gone before, what can we say about who is at risk for conversion? And then what can we do about it? So it was great. We published a paper. We know a few things now about what we can find in data that already existed, was already part of your medical record. How can we now use this to benefit additional patients? So what we found is that we were able to do some risk stratification that had a fair signal to say, even if we're not doing specialized testing, we're not doing expensive imaging or additional diagnostic tests, we can start to see changes in people's medical records leading up to that onset of disease. In this chart farther away, we're talking 5 years prior to disease, and the performance of the model is not as good, but as we get closer, 2 years out, 1 year out, and then at the time of clinical onset, we are getting better and better performance in being able to tell who might convert to disease. So this is an AUC. If it were along the bottom, it would be a coin flip. We might as well predict your risk based on flipping a coin. We really don't have any idea. Whereas at the top, it would be a perfect model. And you can see as we get closer, those performances increase. We get better and better as we get closer. And the reason this is so important, there's a lot of hype out there that AI is going to cure all of these diseases. But we don't even have the mechanisms right now to understand what's causing those diseases. So there's a lot of work that has to go to collect the data that AI needs to help us as the tool that it is to combat these. And so we're seeing there's a common phrase that says there's a silent period prior to neurological disease where damage is being done. There are changes in the brain that you don't see yet. Brains are excellent at compensating in various ways, and it can take a lot of loss before you actually start to see clinical symptoms. But we are able to see some changes, or at least some prognostic indicators, 2 to 5 years before that diagnosis is actually reached in the medical record. 5 years prior, we have the lower performance, but we know things that match with the literature as well, from your background, your demographics, your education level, other disorders that you might have been diagnosed with, a pretty good idea of who might be susceptible. But as we get closer, particularly a year prior to that clinical onset, this is when we're starting to see the emergence of symptoms. We have changes in some of the lab values and weight, and we also can see other comorbidities, other diseases that might be present that could be related to that diagnosis. And then at the time of diagnosis, when you are able to get a clinical diagnosis, you will be experiencing those symptoms, and you may have had falls, maybe with an injury, maybe be using an assistive device, and will continue to see weight loss and possibly other signs of depression or other mental issues. The good news, though, is that what this does is it gives us a chance to intervene sooner. What has happened a lot of times is that by the time we are intervening for the disease, you've already had a lot of changes. We want to get to the point where we can intervene sooner and prevent those changes and do preventative care. We also want to be able to know who is at risk so that we can design better studies and better interventions in the future as well. Once we do that, this becomes a tool that your physician can see right inside your medical record. And this is a big step. For me personally, I think this is really important because AI is a kind of intelligence, but I think it's best used as an augmented intelligence to the physician that you're already seeing. We're not going to have an algorithm come and tell you what medication to take, but we do want to surface to your clinician to say, here are things you might not have seen in their medical record. You might not be aware that they had a fall, that they went to another facility, they didn't, come to see you. You might not have seen that their weight is changing, and you might not know that these 300 variables we originally brought into the model eventually come together to give us a picture that there's a moderate risk. It's not a definitive screening. It's a step along the way to say, maybe you should go the extra step. Maybe you should see a neurologist. Maybe you should collect a little more information. Maybe we can do a sleep test and find out if there's other things going on. But it's a way to triage whether or not we need to do any kind of intervention, any kind of screening, and get it in front of your physician who already knows you and knows your history, and help you find the best intervention that we could see. And that's part of the point, and what we put in front of the clinician is to say, there are 300 variables that we used to make this. These are the things that we think are important. We're not just throwing it out there and saying, here's a moderate risk, good luck. We have seen, this is what's causing it. We see some frailty indicators. We see some issues with sleep. We want to intervene in ways that are personalized and not just a generic red flag. The other place that this becomes really important is that we're talking about pretty large populations and being able to manage those populations. So your clinician who knows you very well and has you in a conversation in their office can probably make some really helpful suggestions to you as an individual. When you're trying to manage an entire population, it can be hard to know how to stratify thousands of patients to say who needs particular interventions, who should get those extra phone calls at home, who should we call in for a research study. And so the risk stratification that we can do can take this population that initially is just thousands of patients, a sea of patients. And we start to look at it through the lens of AI, and now we can start to see, oh, these are the folks that need extra attention. These folks are doing well, we've got this kind of moderate risk. We can also say that we know a little bit more about how this population is going to be aging in the next 5 to 10 years. What do we know about Cleveland as a city? What should Cleveland Clinic be doing to prepare for an aging population in the city of Cleveland? What are the neurology needs going to be? So I think this is a huge place where being able to take something that is autonomous, not a human who has to sit and review every one of these 1,000 patients, but an autonomous process that has the ability to learn from that data and do the real-time monitoring for us is huge. So we're using this in research as well. We're using this to be able to say who should be included in research studies. Some of these diseases are fairly rare. And so if you want to do a prodromal study, a study that looks at folks who have not yet converted to disease, do you have 10,000 patients to capture a few hundred that might convert? That's a very expensive and difficult thing to do. But if you can pull a couple hundred patients and have 10 of them convert because you've targeted a high-risk population, now your studies are becoming much more manageable, and you can do those gold standard clinical trials and learn a lot more, a lot quicker. And so that's what we're doing with Parkinson's disease. We're getting some better biomarkers for Parkinson's. You can see evidence in a skin biopsy. You can see evidence from a smell test. If we can take our high-risk population and triage it better, we should be able to find out how well those biomarkers will hold up in the larger population as well. So that's a specific example to give us something to kind of dig into. There's a lot of additional data collection. I'm going to circle back again to that first slide where I said the key about all of these algorithms is that they're learning from existing data. If we aren't producing the data that they learn from, they're going to stagnate. They won't be able to learn new things until we hit the next level where they become a little better at reasoning than they are now. So a lot of the things that folks in the lab where I work on are these data collection systems. And I wanted to highlight that because I know there were people here who have participated in some of those studies. On this side, we have a staircase. It's going to look a little different maybe than the one that was here if you participated in that study, because this one has some additional force plates. But these kinds of studies where you have an augmented device that you can allow a person to walk up a few stairs, get to the top, do a turnaround, and you have sensors that are measuring their gait, looking at the angles of their knees, seeing how the time is, seeing if there's symmetry. These are things that we just weren't doing. We were watching someone walk down the hall and with a stopwatch and getting a time. But now we have the ability to collect this really complex data per person. And so not only is it complex data per person, we're gaining the ability to collect that complex data on those huge populations. So all of a sudden, there's so much more information that we can get to say, who is going to be at risk for falling? What do we see happening in your gait that we've seen happen in 5,000 other patients who converted from never having had a fall in their life to all of a sudden they've had an issue on the ice or on the stairs or on a rug. And that's huge. We're also working with augmented reality systems, either full virtual reality where you're in a headset and your entire room view looks completely different, completely immersive, to an augmented reality where you're in that room, but you can still see the room in front of you as well. The chairs have not disappeared, but now you have menus, you can interact with virtual scenes as well. And this gives us the chance to create these more realistic home environments that we've had trouble with maybe in the clinic. The clinic is a very sterile place. You're kind of feeling some performance, maybe you're working a little differently than you would in your own home. We have the chance now to say, let's give you a safe environment. let's run you through a grocery shopping task. Let's see how these things are doing. Are you successfully independent? Do we see issues with gait? Do we see issues with memory? Let's walk through these realistic scenarios and try and get a feel for how that's going. So I wanted to highlight that. I wanted to thank those of you who are participating in those with us, because at the end of the day, that real data collection is the only thing that's going to fuel the data-driven AI that is trying to solve these problems. And I wanted to sort of finish up. I'm hoping to have, I hope there's a lot of questions about AI in general that we can talk through. But I did want to say there's a lot, as we talk about neurological disease, there's can be a lot of anxiety around that. Not everybody wants to know if they are at risk. If you can't tell me for certain, if you're not sure what I should do, don't even tell me. And I understand that. There's a lot of things that all of us can do that promote healthy neurological aging. And this is exactly what the clinicians, when they use our models, this is what they're going to tell folks. Even if you're in a little bit of early onset, or if you're doing well, if you're worried well and you're just thinking about neurological disease, first and foremost, you want to keep your brain busy. And I know everybody in this room is already doing that, because here you are attending a speaking series. You're allowing me to put my research up and talk through, see statistics on that. So that's a fantastic, fantastic thing to do. But certainly just even the cognitive games that we all like to play, being social, getting out and moving, exercise is a huge focus as well, in terms of exercise your body, improve your brain. I'm probably getting the phrase wrong that we do in the exercise lab. And of course, healthy living, diet changes. There are diets that are specifically designed. There's a diet called the MIND diet that is designed for neurological health. These are healthy things that any of us can do, if we have concerns or just want to live to our full potential. So that's everything I want to say about this specific research project. I think we're going to take a little bit of a break so that we have a chance to get microphones set up here.
So we'll begin the Q&A. Who would like to? Where's Trevor?
Here I am.
By the way, Jay has said that Trevor is one of his best mentors of all time, so they have a long relationship.
It's Trevor Jones, and it's great to have Dr. Albert back. And he and I go back 100+ years, I think. I have the utmost respect for Dr. Albert. My question is, which probably affects everyone in this room, age-related problems with eyesight. And that includes me, by the way, and I've yet to see a solution for that.
So the question is, what is the solution for age-related problems with eyesight? So I think that there's two avenues here. Certainly, your optometrist, if they had a great solution, would hopefully be giving that to you. I think that if we have to compensate for it, there is a lot that AI can do now to help compensate for that. I'm a great lover of audio-enabled devices. So my son can't read yet, he's 5, but he turns on assistive devices on the PlayStation 5 so that things can be read to him as he's playing the game, as he's trying to understand when he's playing a video game. He's working with assistive devices there. I think that AI has a role to play in solving almost any medical issue, but I think there will still be some time there. They still have to collect that data and figure out physical solutions as well. I don't know, does that address the meat of the question, or is there something else you'd like me to?
Coming to you, Bill.
Well, this is true. Yeah, so this is true. So I mentioned the headsets we use with augmented reality and virtual reality. So that's a... Let me check the back of my hair. I didn't think about that for the presentation. So when we, in terms of augmentation, they would have the ability to augment what you're seeing, and potentially, again, maybe give visual cues, maybe do larger text, and give you more context for, even if you're not seeing it initially, the headset can help accommodate that and bubble up to you the things that should get your attention.
Hi, it's Bill Conway, trustee emeritus, so I've had a wonderful experience over the years with the clinic. The question I have is, how is it being used in the clinical sense that, you know, over the years, I've gone every year once or twice. I'm poked, prodded, looked, watched as I walk across the room. Is the AI doing that? Or how are they replacing that kind of?
The poking and the prodding?
The poking and the prodding, yeah.
Yes. There will still be some poking and the prodding is going to be my initial prediction. I think where you see it, so there's what's actually out there now and there's a lot of what's coming. One of the things that's actually out there now that I think is hugely impactful is the AI scribe. So when your physicians first got computers, you probably noticed that all of a sudden they weren't looking at you. They were so busy typing your information in that they could barely look up and talk to you. So what AI scribe does is allow the clinician to disconnect from the computer and have a conversation with you, because AI scribe is now listening and typing it up and basically being that administrative assistant. It's not as flashy as a lot of the maybe research applications, but in terms of getting your clinician to be able to make eye contact and have that appropriate conversation, and they can come back and review the notes later and say, oh, yep, that's what we talked about, that's great, I don't have to do the documentation myself. I think that kind of augmentation is hugely important in freeing up your clinician to do what they need to do, which is give you medical advice and not be so busy typing.
Hi. We have all of this information just coming through this maw, being sifted out and putting into silos and one thing or another. So I think AI is really only good if you have a reason to want it and a target you're going for, not just information. So obviously, we're looking to see some solutions. What's the parallel path you're doing? You're doing the AI with the information and putting it in, but who's working on taking that information and doing something for people with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the research process all the way to the bedside, how is it actually benefiting folks? So again, there's two sides of that. We are able, from the project we worked on, to publish those findings that clinicians are able to read as well. For me, having it in front of the clinician to be able to review, and this is where you're talking about information overload, that's exactly right. Your clinician has your entire medical history in the EHR, and that can be difficult to come in and process. If you've ever had the feeling like, oh, I don't even know if they opened my medical record before they started talking to me, that's information overload, right? So we are putting this in front of the clinician to bubble up to their attention and say, here's your patient list. We've got 3 flags. These are folks we think you should take a look at. When they go in, they can see exactly why, and we can give them recommendations, say this is what we think might help. It's up to the clinician. Their judgment is really going to be what drives it. But you've got a research side where you can publish it and let folks read what you've learned. And you've got a clinical side where it's available to them to say, this needs a neurology consult, or maybe you can participate and help us see the effects of exercise in a prodromal situation. I think that actually getting it to clinic is happening.
My name is Bob Katz. I noted on one of your first slides that you noted risk factors in the 2 to 5 year period. and then another column with risk factors in the 1-year period, and then the actual period. I also noted that the risk factors in the 2 to 5 year period disappeared in the 1-year period. Is there a reason that the risk factors are no longer important, or that you miscalculated? Why is that disparity there?
That's a great question. So it's just a question of building on what we already know. So it's not that the factors disappear. Certainly they're still part of the equation. There are, as I said, about 300 variables that actually go into it. But we try to bubble up to the surface what's the most important. So those things in the 2 to 5 year range, your age and education and your demographics and your background, those are still important. They haven't just dropped off completely. It's just we do see changes in your medical history. We see the emergence of new symptoms, and we build our understanding. So in that slide, we're just trying to introduce emergent things in those time periods, not to say the other things have completely gone away. They're still there.
If I may, you also mentioned that there were actions that you take in relationship to these things. Is that published in any way that we can have access to look to see things that we might want to do for ourselves in relationship to the risk factors that you are identifying?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the paper itself is published in a medical journal that we can share. It is designed to be kind of clinician facing, but that's not to say that you can't read it and understand and take some actions. So that's a great question, and I thought people might have that concern, which is why I think some of the general healthy aging advice is so helpful. But in a personalized sense, you could go in and look at that, but I think if you know that you have issues around sleep or you have issues around diet or cardiovascular disease, anything you can do to manage those, to make this the simplest answer, I guess, is going to help with the brain health as well. So I think we could circulate that. It is fairly clinician facing right now. We really want the clinician to interface with you and give you that direct advice. But I don't think there's any reason you couldn't go in and kind of see what happened in the population in general. I think the real key is having it when it's, if your clinician were using this, if you have it personalized to say, this is what we see. We see this fluctuation. We see some frailty indicators, to have those recommendations personalized through the lens of the clinician right now.
Nancy?
Yes. So I just have a quick question. With all this data coming in and it's being consolidated into algorithms, how does AI decide that? I mean, is there any false positive that ever happens with AI, or is it always right 100%?
It's not always right 100%. So the way that it decides is through a learning process that is very similar to the human experience learning process. So if you think about a kid learning to recognize things in the world, or even your clinician studying at school, there's a tremendous number of examples that they are given where they're instructed and they see this is how it turned out, right? So just kind of having that complete picture. You see it once, you gain some intuition. You see it 100 times, you've gained a lot more intuition. 50,000 times, you've got a pretty good idea now. That's not to say, it depends on the application. That's not to say AI is not going to make mistakes. There are many applications where you can show that AI makes fewer mistakes than a human would. And I think that's really the gold standard for deciding whether to implement AI is it better than what we have? Is it doing better than we can do on our own? But that's a huge part of why we do it through the clinician lens as well. It's because it's learning by example, and it could get it wrong for sure.
I just wondered if there were checkpoints or some, something. I mean, you expect a person to be there going, wait a minute, is that built into these programs?
There's a validation stage, and usually there's a couple, an internal validation and an external validation. And that's a really important step. And sometimes that involves clinical experts reviewing, and then you compare again to see, are we in line with what the humans think? That's always what you want. If you can reach that performance, again, we'll filter it, we'll put it in front of the clinician, but if they look at it and say, that doesn't make sense with what I'm seeing with the person in front of me, then you go with the clinician. Absolutely. This is what the phrase I would like to use is augmented intelligence, where we are bubbling these answers up to the person. There is a person right now, always, that is reviewing it. We'd have to see some tremendous advances before anyone would be comfortable removing the human interaction in a lot of these situations.
Is it, you hear about graduating seniors in colleges and universities and the problem finding jobs. Is there a job market for this type of activity or career for young people?
I think that's a great point. So there is kind of a shift in the kind of work people will be doing in the future, probably. So as AI becomes better at doing certain kinds of tasks, the jobs related to those tasks are not going to be there. But this is going to allow humans to work at what we might say the top of their license, to do more interesting work. We want to get rid of the tedious, we want to get rid of the automatic. I would argue we don't really want AI being our creative people. We want humans to be involved in doing the top of license creative and intellectual reasoning work. And I think that's where the job market is going to shift. So you'll see the ability to apply AI, and you'll probably be able to do at scale much more than one person could have done before. But you're not going to be doing the menial tasks that AI can do in its sleep, essentially. And that's the goal. We want to elevate people.
My name is Stuart Crampton. I wonder what your thinking is and your group's thinking is about new uses of genetic data. You get indirect influence of genetics from just what happens to people. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as though you're missing everything. On the other hand, I have one copy of the APO4.
There's a hole there. It's all right, I'm good. Sorry.
I have one copy of the APO4 gene, and I'm glad I don't have two. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there is any thinking about new ways to do it. Are there ethical problems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So genetics is a field that's going to benefit potentially greatly from AI. This is a tremendous computational problem. And in fact, I didn't mention it on the slide. The most beautiful slide I had was the quantum computer that Cleveland Clinic has. And I think proteins, drug discovery, and genetics are huge uses for quantum computing and AI, which is an entirely different way of looking at it. Ethical concerns are going to surround genetics for a number of reasons, even entirely separately from AI. Ethical concerns with genetics have to do with what you find out about your own genetics is not only your own personal information, it's every relative that you have. So we talked a little bit that not everybody wants to know. So if you know, now suddenly you know about your brother too, as well. So there's some concerns there. There's an ability to change genetics, which I'll leave to your imagination, the ethical concerns that you could come up with changing your genetics. I think the key here is understanding those influences. There's a large study with the Alzheimer's gene now to say if we know you're at higher risk, what interventions seem to work, particularly exercise interventions for the brain. But genetics is one where AI is going to have a huge impact. And I'm not sure it changes the ethical concerns that have kind of been there all along.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, my name is Tony Oliverio. Question, do you share your information with other health organizations that are working in this same area? And if so, do they have models similar to yours so that you can use that information?
Yes, so there's a certain amount of sharing that happens. There's, as you know, medical data in particular has a lot of constraints because of privacy. So there are certain ways that we can and cannot use medical data, which is good. That's what you want to happen. Again, so it's the twofold. So the research is published freely. So we have made our discoveries completely public. The sharing of the algorithm itself, we have a pretty good idea of how we can do that because we have integrated with a medical record system that's the largest one in the US, which means lots of other hospital systems could use the same technology. There's a lot of handshakes, there are a lot of competing algorithms, there's a lot of handshakes that are happening. Folks like to use the stuff they developed internally because they know it well and they understand it. But there's nothing that stops us from sharing it besides really just the desire from those institutions to work together. So I think that's a huge direction that we're going to do more and more. We see a lot more information from other hospital systems within our clinical care as well.
Right here.
Jack Wilhelm, what caused you to go from mathematics in your undergraduate and your master's program and use those skills in the medical field?
That's a great question. So when I was in school, artificial intelligence existed, but there wasn't exactly the data science. We didn't really have a lot of the big data applications yet. So I started out, I used to work at the same company as my husband. He still works there. It's a great company. But it's the tire industry. So I was working on visual inspection systems. I was modeling the surface of a tire so that we could grind it correctly. I was also doing a lot of retail analytics. And when you're a mathematician, problems are interesting, right? Just anything you can solve as a problem is interesting. But I did hit my ceiling of interest with retail and tires. Sorry, hon. And I did. I had that pivot moment where I specifically said, well, if I could learn more about anything at the same time as solving mathematical problems, what would it be? And you got two ways you can go with that. Like, well, I can get healthier. Maybe I should go into finance. That seems like a great one. But I went with healthier. I thought, this is the thing that would be most interesting to me. And I was fortunate, I was just fortunate, really, to find the place that I am, because it's such a good fit for me.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Ray Royskin, I have a couple of comments and general information that may make it a little bit easier. When you go into your clinician's office, you fill out forms that give them a history, forms that tell you the symptoms you're having, and he does testing to look for the signs of disorders. Over a period of time, those things are kept. You can check the records yourself sometimes on my chart or others and see the progression of these things. What artificial intelligence is doing is keeping an eye on all those things. And when enough of those things come together and they're changing, there's an indication there's potentially a problem. On the back end of it, they can look at disorders that have happened and work backwards and check those records, see what those things were, and that's what they're trying to pick up earlier. With that, they can keep refining it. The technology that exists now is mind-boggling as far as determining these things and determining areas. In my case, I was an eye doctor. And people now can get a device. We've had it for years before I even retired. We can look at the inside of the eye and look at the various layers of the retina. And there's some indication in there that ties directly to Alzheimer's. And they've just discovered that in the last 4 or 5 years. And now those tests and those machines are being refined even better. So the whole purpose of this is to be able to determine on the front end, while you may have mild symptoms or indicate some days you do feel depressed, sometimes you have fallen, those all things add up over time. And if you can pick them up early enough, they can interfere with the process if they have something that will help. So you see suggestions, for example, of when you walk around your house, they tell you what to do to avoid falling. Like, don't leave cords hanging out, don't leave furniture in different locations, make sure you have proper lighting, take your time, don't turn quickly and walk at the same time. So yeah, all this stuff is very helpful if you have the computer ability to take it, determine what's going on, and see if you can pick out a red herring.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's so helpful to have the clinical perspective on this. So I appreciate that.
Jay, can you bring us up to date on your Parkinson's study? I'm so fascinated with you.
Which one?
Yeah. So first of all, Christy's done an excellent job in talking about the work, and to the other point, to the gentleman I don't know who asked, who was talking about, who was a retired eye doctor, but that is exactly a great example of that test, right? I don't know the exact test off the top of my head, but who's going to order that test, right? So the model that Christy was talking about earlier, that could be a red or a yellow flag to say, let's order that test, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't normally order it. And so it's again, a powerful way to surface this information. So, but to your question about the Parkinson's work, so we are very close to, so we did a controlled clinical trial where we had exercise, or people exercising for 1 year. 125 individuals exercised who had Parkinson's, and 125 people did not exercise. And what we found was those individuals who did not exercise, they increased over the course of the year, like you would expect, 4 to 6 points on their clinical ratings. And then what we found was that exercise actually slowed the progression, and those patients didn't have any change. So you might be sitting there, well, oh, wow, we spent all this money to show that exercise actually is valuable. We already sort of knew that. We did, sort of. But this is the first long-term study to demonstrate that you can slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. So we're submitting this paper to the New England Journal of Medicine. And if we were Eli Lilly or Biogen, our stock price would go through the roof. But that's not who we are. But the other part of this, and this is where Christy's work becomes very important for this, is that not just, oh, go exercise and do something, but rather, so Christy built a model to identify what are the key features of exercise. So actually giving you a prescription for exercise, not just go out and do it. So what we found was the pedaling. Well, first, you have to get on the bike 3 times a week, so doing it. Yeah, so that's important. The other thing that's important is your pedaling rate, so your RPMs. So you have to pedal at about 75 to 78 RPMs. And if you do that, you have a very high probability of having a very positive response. And so, again, I think, rather than just saying, oh, you should exercise, using the models that Christy and her team has built now gives a very clear prescription that individuals should do. And again, with Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, these are diseases that rob people of control, right? And so if we can give an individual control back, then through very clear exercise recommendations, that's a positive. And then also, Christy didn't mention it, but the other things that we're doing is now that we have this prescription with that model that she's developed, we can start to say, okay, you might convert to Parkinson's in 2 years. Let's start a trial where you're going to exercise, you're going to do the Parkinson's prescription for exercise, and let's see who converts, or do you convert to disease later? So it's a great amount of data that has been generated. So, which I do have a question. I don't want to take it, but I do have a question for Christy. Who's your favorite boss? No. No. So, yeah. I think she's the boss. She's the boss. No. But so everyone knows all about data, and there's all sorts of data here, and that we're gathering and we're contributing and things like that. Can you talk about the quality of data and how that is impacted or impacts performance of models, and that, really to the old phrase of garbage in, garbage out, and where is that equilibrium, if there is one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So quantity of data, I talked a lot about quantity of data, and I did not address the quality of the data. Quality data is better than more data in most circumstances. Here at Cleveland Clinic, we have I'm very fortunate to work with a team that has done a lot of work to make that EHR data as high quality and accessible as possible. So I'm certainly not the only person who is doing this kind of research on this data. And there's a lot that happens prior to us even touching it, even in terms of AI that reads the note and pulls out a language, reads the language and pulls out a symptom and says, oh, these folks have experienced falls or constipation or headaches or these other symptoms. So it is incredibly important to have quality data. AI can do a bit in terms of trying to make up for that, to try and understand if data is missing. It can kind of figure out what might have been there. There's a lot of fixes that it attempts to do with real world observational data. The clinical trials are the absolute gold standard. If we can have folks in that will do the process and do the exercise, and we can do the surveys, we don't need as much of that data because it's such high quality data. When we go to the medical records where they're not planning on being part of research, they're just trying to live their lives, a lot of that data is not there. They've not had that test. They didn't come in that year. The quality is a lot different. We need a lot more data to try and understand how to fill in those gaps when those gaps exist. So I can't say enough about the folks that have participated in those trials, the absolute gold standard of data.
Okay, this is Trevor Jones again. An idea that may be of interest to Cleveland Clinic. Can you imagine AI at the patent office in Washington, D.C., getting 200,000, presumably very confidential ideas supporting a patent? Now, the Cleveland Clinic processes a lot of patents. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine AI going through all those patents that come into the patent office in Washington.
So you're asking about AI processing the patents or being able to get patents from the AI?
No, forget about the clinic for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Patent office get all these ideas, but people have.
Microphone closer to your mouth. Closer to your mouth.
People give their disclosures, and with AI, you can extrapolate from that to another advantage.
I see.
Which is also confidential.
Yes. Yeah, so that's a fantastic point. So that patent office is full of everyone's original ideas. And so we're talking about using that data to create new original ideas, to extrapolate. And I think that you're touching on the privacy concerns that a lot of folks have with AI right now. Where are the ideas coming from? Where is the data coming from? So there's a lot of legal questions, a lot of questions about regulation that are happening, a lot of questions about copyrights and patents. And that's going to get worked out. It's going to get worked out in a political stage. It'll be worked out as violations occur and people decide they do or do not like what has happened. The thing with the patent data in particular that I think is going to be important is when we really get the AI now is a fantastic language generator. It's the AI that's in the news so much is really great at reading something like that and then saying something about it that at least sounds good. they are working very hard to make it able to reason in the way that you're suggesting. And if you use AI, if you're doing these prompts, something you can do to make the AI better is ask it to explain its reasoning. It's just like a student. If you ask it, why did you say that? What are the steps that you came to? It can actually come up with a better answer when it forces itself to go through those steps. It's a little creepy, actually, some of the research I've seen on that. You can ask it to pretend to be a statistician or pretend you're a doctor, and it'll answer differently, because it has a ton of different perspectives, and it can start sorting through and say, oh, only the doctors describe it this way. Only the real statisticians would do it this way. And you can manipulate it in that way. So,
We have time for one more question in the back.
Hi, going back to the clinical trials, my question is, how are people ensuring that they're doing the workouts? Are they being watched, or how are they monitoring? Because people could say, oh, I will participate, I will do the workouts, but it could.
So technology is a huge help for us here. So we have the bikes that actually record and share those workouts. We also have fantastic dedicated clinicians who are calling the patients on a regular basis just to ask how things are going. So between the smart technology and the bike that's tracking it, and the sort of clinician touch base on reporting, we get a really good view. And that bike, that technology in the bike is really important, because when we start saying, what is the cadence, what is the heart rate, what is it, that's all being collected in real time during the workout session. That's not a patient trying to self-report that they did a really great workout that day. We have the augmented technology to get exactly what was happening during those workout sessions. So it's huge. It's just a game changer in terms of understanding what's happening outside of the clinic.
Christy, thank you so much. I told you there'd be lots of questions.
That's great. That's what I was hoping for. Thanks so much for having me.
And we can now go to the great room to enjoy the reception. Thank you for coming.
Perfect. Well done, ladies.